It's with great sadness, Mr. Speaker, that I rise in support of this resolution. I so had wished decades ago that we wouldn't be standing here now, still pleading the case for the people of Tibet. I thank Rush Holt for giving us this opportunity again with Congresswoman Russ Layton sponsoring this legislation, Howard Berman, as I mentioned, the chairman, Frank Wolf and Jim McGovern, the co-chairs of the Human Rights Caucus in the Congress, carrying on a strong tradition. Jim McGovern carrying on that tradition. But Mr. Rohrabacher mentioned, and I see Mr. Chris Smith there, we've been fighting this fight for a very long time. Little did we think, my colleagues, go back a generation when the Dalai Lama first came to the Congress in 1987, not first came, but first came with his proposal for autonomy. Would we have ever thought then that over 20 years later we would still be making this case? Remember after Tiananmen Square, that would be 20 years in June, and we talked about human rights in China and Tibet, they said peaceful coexistence, peaceful engagement, this is going to lead to more of the improvement in human rights in China and Tibet. A generation has gone by, 20 years later, and what do we have? A more repressive situation in Tibet. A situation so bad it moved His Holiness in the statement he released on the occasion of the 50th anniversary to say that life for the Tibetans under the repression of the Chinese regime is hell on earth. His Holiness used those terms. A man of nonviolence and gentle nature would be moved to use those words. So I thank all who are responsible for bringing this resolution to the floor, because as we know, this week marks the 50th, 5 decades of waiting for this peaceful evolution to take place, this peaceful evolution that was going to lead to more democratic freedoms. And this was against a peaceful uprising against the Chinese government, and then led to the exiling of His Holiness out of Tibet. With this resolution, we remember that day and honor the many brave Tibetans who sacrificed their lives for freedom. Thousands of them did. With this resolution, we recognize the hospitality of India for receiving the Tibetans into that great nation. His Holiness and the nation of India share a tradition of nonviolence and compassion, and we salute India for extending that to the people of Tibet as they escaped. For the last year, Tibet has been under martial law, and the human rights situation has severely worsened, according to the State Department report. There has been no progress in the discussions with the Chinese government. It is long past time, 50 years, for Beijing to respect the human rights of every Tibetan, indeed of every Chinese. The United States Congress continues to be a bedrock of support for the Tibetan people, and we do so in a strong bipartisan way. As I mentioned, in 1987, His Holiness the Dalai Lama spoke in the Capitol at the Congressional Human Rights Caucus. I was a brand new member and invited there by Congressman Lantos. It was there that he outlined his middle way approach that called for autonomy for Tibet. On Capitol Hill, over 20 years ago, His Holiness declared a statement of autonomy for Tibet. 20 years later, we were all proud to stand with President Bush as he presented the Congressional Gold Medal to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, in the words of the President, for his many enduring and outstanding contributions to peace, nonviolence, human rights, and religious understanding. Last year, as Mr. Holt mentioned, we had a congressional delegation that visited India, where we were able to meet with His Holiness. This visit, either by coincidence or karma, took place only a matter of weeks after the protests that swept across the Tibetan plateau and the crackdown by the Chinese authorities. So when we were in India and seeing all of these people who were escaping from Tibet and prisoners who had been tortured in prisons in Tibet, telling us their stories. They were stories that were fresh and current and tragic, and we were hopeless and helpless in how we could help them in a very real way. What we can do is put the moral authority of the Congress of the United States in the form of this resolution with a broad bipartisan vote down as a marker to say that we understand the situation there, that we encourage it to be different, and as Mr. Rohrbacher said, that we are on the side of the Tibetan people. But it shouldn't be a question of taking sides. It should be a question of resolving a difference, and that's what we hope that the Chinese government will do. Just as on a lighter note, when we were there, in addition to visiting the prisoners and those who had escaped over the mountains only a matter of days before, we visited the children in their schools. And when they were adorable, they had made flags that were Tibetan flags on one side, American flags on the other. They had flags of the country of India. The children were so appreciative of the hospitality of India, so grateful to the American people for speaking out on behalf of them, and so proud of their Tibetan heritage. They're beautiful. The preservation of the culture of Tibet is, of course, a very important part of our enthusiasm for change. But on the light, as I said, on the lighter side, as we were traveling through the streets, our delegation, our bipartisan delegation, Mr. Sensenbrenner is the most senior Republican who came on the trip and was very powerful in his statements there. But as we were traveling through the streets were lined, I should call them roads. The roads were lined with people, and they were waving flags, American, as I said, American, Tibetan, Indian flags along the way. And one sign caught my eye. It said, "Thank you for everything that you have done for us so far." So far. So in any event, more is expected, more will come. I told you about His Holiness's speech and how statement that he put out and how he called the situation there. The Tibetans are in the depths of suffering and hardship, that they are literally experiencing hell on earth. Mr. Speaker, without objection, I'd like to submit His Holiness's statement for the record.
Without objection.
I'd also like to quote from the statement put out by the State Department last night. In part, it says, "We urge China to reconsider its policies in Tibet that have created tensions due to the harmful impact to Tibetan religion, culture, and livelihoods. We believe that substantive dialogue with the Dalai Lama's representatives, consistent with the Dalai Lama's commitment to disclaiming any mention of sovereignty or independence for Tibet, can lead to progress in bringing about solutions and help achieve true and lasting stability in Tibet." I'm very pleased with the statement from the State Department. Mr. Speaker, the situation in Tibet challenges the conscience of the world. If freedom-loving people around the world do not speak out for human rights in China and Tibet, then we lose moral authority to talk about it any other place in the world. On the 50th anniversary of the Dalai Lama being forced into exile, we must heed his guidance and his transcendent message of peace. And we must never forget the people of Tibet in their ongoing struggle. That is why I urge my colleagues to support this resolution and thank my colleagues for giving us this opportunity to do so today.